The first or second semester I taught microbiology, I had to give a take-home examination because I was called up for jury duty and at least was going to be gone for the day and had no time to make any other provisions. Somehow I found the time, however, to go to a few of the Wikipedia articles that I thought were most likely to be plagiarized by students and modify them with a phrase inserted so that I could simply search for it in their submissions and catch those who had cheated. The additions were caught quickly after they were made, but not before I caught 3 of my students who had lifted information directly from Wikipedia and pasted it into their reports. This calls into question the validity of organizations like Wikipedia as sources of information and their so-called contribution to fighting quote-unquote fake news. Now, a recent article, and I'll try and remember to post this here, describes how corporate media tout Wikipedia as a tool to help fight conspiracy theories and messaging. And the Esquire magazine published an article gushing on the accuracy of this online encyclopedia. And it calls into question the validity of this because of how Wikipedia is put together. Back then, which was 7 or 8 years ago, many of the articles could be modified by visitors at any time. Now, they've put the lid on that to some degree, and some of them can only be modified by certain people. But that doesn't mean that the people who are making the contributions are either qualified or making relevant and accurate annotations to the articles posted. In fact, there are many times when, in just looking for a simple answer, I search and there is no Wikipedia article for it. And some of these are things that I believe are important. But there are plenty of articles in Wikipedia on things of certain political importance to where it is clear that Wikipedia has an agenda. Now, this does not mean that no one has an agenda. I tell my students all the time that my agenda is to convince them that everyone has an agenda, just so that they can make better choices. Follow the money, consider who gives to Wikipedia, who works for Wikipedia, and who touts Wikipedia, and you can tell very clearly that they're a partisan and subjective organization. For example, 4 years ago, radio talk show host Mark Levin complained on his radio show that Wikipedia had published things about him that were false. He was unable to get them to redact or alter those and was unable to edit a page about himself. Now, whether you agree with Mark Levin or not, it's interesting that the person about whom the article is written doesn't have permission to change the article. Who does? And that begs the question. How are they picking what submissions are relevant and ought to be contributed? To consider that, to consider the practical matter and the potential downfalls of this, we consider the compilation of the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, whether you've seen the movie or not, which I doubt, because it was very poorly marketed and came out just before the quarantines. The book, The Professor / movie, The Professor and the Madman, details the relationship between the man compiling the Oxford English Dictionary and one of its major contributors, Major William Minor, a Union Civil War veteran and man currently being held in custody for having committed murder in one of the boroughs of London. The United States refused to extradite him back to the United States, so he was housed on a manor property, and it took some time before they realized that one of their major contributors was actually an accused felon. This somehow did not deter them from including his submissions, and I'm not saying that they ought to have, because his submissions were relevant to the topic. He clearly did not have any kind of a bias, because at the time the compilation was about, the movement was to compile original sources and instances where the words had first occurred. And Dr./Major Minor was an avid and voracious reader and had many citations going back for centuries where they could track the evolution and usage of words, which was very invaluable in helping to define the formation of the English language. However, Wikipedia is not built the same way. Wikipedia is not about establishing a way of communication or a way of documenting what is and how it has changed over time. There are no update tags on the articles. There are sometimes voluminous sources, and sometimes there are none at all. Many of the sources have broken links, so if you try to look them up, you can't find them, and so we're just supposed to take people's words for it. Dr. Miner's contributions cited books, chapters, lines, and verses where individuals had used words as examples of their context. And I bet if you had access to that information, you could go back and trace that today. Now, I don't have an original edition of the OED, but I do have a 1911 edition. And the 1911 edition illustrates very, very well how bias in communication has crept into our social available media like Wikipedia. If you look up the word fix in my 1911 version of the OED, you will find that it does not say to repair. It says to make permanent, to secure in place, to rig, which is the way the word fix used to be used. To fix a fight, to fix an election, to fix a pipe. Well, it's migrated since then. So sometime in the last 100 years, fix has been modified to also mean repair, which begs the question, when politicians say they're going to fix education or they're going to fix healthcare, do they mean it in the 1911 way, or do they mean it in the one they want us to assume that they mean? And that's the problem with this. There is no tracking of history without the Wayback Machine. There is no way of vetting the contributors. And how do I know that the articles are not being submitted by somebody who is there not to literally kill me, but to assassinate my character? When a person who has an article about him is not allowed to alter his own page, it brings to question the validity of the vetting process. Who should you ask for information? His detractors and denigrators, or should you go straight to the source itself? I've always found it odd when people ask for opinions by people who are clearly opponents of a thing, and then pretend that they have received an objective opinion. So we have Wikipedia, which supposedly addresses fake news and conspiracies, handles political topics, and is used by students as an overarching resource, except that there's no transparency or consistency in how they obtain their submissions or any kind of vetted maintenance to make sure the information corroborating that is true. And so the argument could very well be made that there is a conspiracy at Wikipedia, whether it's intentional or not, to give the public misinformation and a false sense of assurity and security that the information available in this online and ever-changing, I might add, encyclopedia is reliable. Remember that 8 years ago, I was able to modify it, to modify articles that were accessed by students for an academic work. And because they were too stupid to read it, it took some time before someone at Wikipedia found it. And it wasn't like I put something in it that wasn't easily identifiable, or something that could be taken as true. It was something that was very obvious, that was very easy for me to find. I inserted the words cha-cha like a sissy girl into the article, so I could simply search for it. Well, obviously that doesn't belong in any microbiological articles, and so it was right for them to remove it. They did not ask me why I put it there. They were not interested. They were only interested in removing something that they felt did not belong. But what about people who put things in there that might sound like they belong? Would they notice? Would they remove it? Would they ask you why you put it there and give them a source? Because all too often I see editorials masquerading as news and information without corroboration. Opinions and talk are not information or news. They are opinions and talk. And when people believe they are news and facts and information, then we get to this place where we are in this world where people confuse them and confuse things like facts and truth, like Joe Biden does sometimes. We're interested in facts, not truth. I'm not sure what he was trying to say, but it's possible neither was he. Because when words only offer a means to meaning, They have to be used well. They have to be used in the correct context. And more importantly, it helps us to know the context, not just of where they were found, but of who those were that found them, so that we can ask ourselves, as they should have at the Oxford English Dictionary, is Dr. Minor the person on whom we should be relying for the submissions? I'm not saying he shouldn't be. But if we don't ask the question, then we're just as guilty of fomenting falsehoods as those against whom we claim to be campaigning. It is well known in science and math, at least at the college, that Wikipedia is not a valid source. We frown on it. If it's used as a source in a paper, they're automatically deducted points, because I cannot rely on it as a peer-reviewed source. Peer review has its own problems, but who's reviewing Wikipedia? Who's reviewing Snopes? When they own the information, they can bend it all they like. This is the problem with most of our information. A friend of mine once said, most of what you find on the internet is pretty useless, which is probably why it is free. And as I tell people sometimes, if you don't like what I have to say, at least you got your money's worth. Because you've never been charged to watch my videos, view my channel, or listen to me. I don't charge you for that. This is all free. Because then there can be no complaints that I misled you. I'm not being paid, and you didn't have to pay me. Consider the source. Follow the money. Do your own homework. Don't rely on someone else to do things for you that you can do just because you're too lazy to do the research. And don't let them tell you what a thing means to you. We all get to decide how we feel and what we think about the things that happen to us and the things that people tell us. Whether you agree with it or not is completely up to you. Do your own homework. That's always good advice. Godspeed and good luck.